I saw my husband declared dead by the world in a secret biometric file stamped status alive. For 3 years I drowned in grief until a note dropped from the cold ceiling. Stop now if you don't want to end up like him. In that moment I realized this wasn't just loss. It was a manhunt. If you think this is just another family story, you're wrong. Subscribe now so you don't miss the next shocking episode from us. The city was silent, except for the wind brushing snow against the window glass, soft but relentless, like the hush that fills a house after everyone is gone. Rachel Keller woke before dawn, just as she had every day for the past 3 years. The bedroom was cold, the kind of cold that slipped under doors and coiled around your ankles. She lay still, eyes open, watching the pale haze creep across the ceiling. The alarm clock glowed 5:32 a.m. in red digits, too early for anything but ghosts. She reached across the bed, half expecting to find the shape of Liam's back, the slow, solid rise and fall of his breathing. But there was nothing. Only the empty hollow in the mattress, perfectly molded to the memory of a body that hadn't been there in years. Her hand came back, cold fingers curling in on themselves, then pressing to her heart as if she could hold in the ache that had become as much a part of her as breath. She forced herself out of bed, feet meeting icy wood. The hallway was dark. She padded toward the kitchen, pulling her robe tight, passing the wedding photo that had not moved from the hallway table, a laughing couple on the edge of a glacier, arms around each other, wind in their hair. She could almost hear his voice teasing her about the cold, about how Canadians didn't need scarves if they had someone to keep them warm. Habit was a strange comfort. She opened the cabinet and took out 2 coffee mugs, placing them side by side. Liam's mug, the old chipped one with faded red writing. "Let's get lost." She still brewed the coffee strong, just as he liked, pouring half into his mug and letting the steam drift up as if he might appear to claim it. Her own hands cradled the second cup, and she waited, letting the scent fill the kitchen, hoping for something, anything to feel normal again. As the coffee percolated, she turned on the radio. The same CBC morning show she and Liam once listened to, the same cheerful voices delivering the same weather reports, though now the forecast always sounded like a warning. She barely listened, but let the drone fill the silence. It was better than the echo of her own thoughts. Sometimes the radio played old news segments on slow mornings, and today it did her heart catching as the words spilled into the kitchen like water beneath a locked door. 3 years since the disappearance of Liam Keller, former intelligence officer, presumed dead following a tragic avalanche in the Yukon backcountry. Rachel's breath caught knuckles whitening on the edge of the counter. The RCMP concluded their investigation after only a week of searching, citing avalanche danger and impossible conditions. No body recovered, only broken equipment and scattered supplies. The voice faded, replaced by weather, but the words circled inside her skull, relentless. Presumed dead. Investigation closed. Rachel had learned to hate those phrases, the cold, bureaucratic language of letting go. She carried both mugs to the small kitchen table, setting his down in its usual spot facing the window. The house was too quiet. Even the refrigerator hummed low as if in mourning. Outside, the world was shrouded in dim blue light, snow piling silently atop fences, cars the sidewalk that led nowhere. Toronto was vast, but in winter, it felt like a locked room, every corner filled with the absence of the man she loved. She opened the newspaper, flipping past headlines about politics, the economy, and the everyday catastrophes of other lives. But beneath the stack, she kept one article creased and yellowing, the ink faded but the pain sharp as ever. The headline read, "Canadian officer lost in Yukon avalanche, claims local hero." She read the article again, though she'd memorized every word. It told her nothing she didn't already know. Or rather, nothing she hadn't spent 3 years questioning. Details that didn't add up. Timestamps that didn't match his last message. Equipment listed as recovered that she knew he would never leave behind. After the first month, everyone had told her to move on. The government issued an official condolence. Friends brought flowers. Her mother suggested therapy. But Rachel had learned to live inside her stubbornness because grief was easier than betrayal. After breakfast, she wandered into Liam's study. The room left untouched except for dust and sunlight. His desk sat in the center, maps spread across the surface corners, curling with age. Rachel ran a finger over the Yukon map, her eyes drawn to the angry red X Liam had marked a week before he left. She could still hear him explaining the plan, voice low and serious, tracing the line from Whitehorse to a remote patch near the Snake River. If anything happens, he'd said, start here. That's the place they'll never look. She had started there. Search parties, phone calls, emails to anyone who'd ever known Liam. But the answers all faded to silence. Only the map remained a scar on the wall, a wound that never closed. She sat at the desk, pulling open the top drawer. Liam's field notebook rested atop a stack of government forms, its leather cover worn thin. She flipped to the last page, words scrawled in his hurried hand. Saw someone in the trees, not bare, watching. Avalanche risk high. We'll check perimeter. The words made her shiver. They always did. She snapped the notebook shut, heart pounding, as if something could still be done, as if she were not 3 years too late. Her phone buzzed on the table, a message from her sister checking in. Rachel let it ring, watching the snow continue to fall, coating the world in forgetfulness. She didn't want to talk. Not about the future, not about the past, not about moving on. She was tired of being told to heal, tired of being told there was a right way to grieve. On the side table sat Liam's old digital recorder. She pressed play, letting his voice fill the room, soft and crackling with static. Hey, Rach, if you're hearing this, I'm probably out of range. I'll try to call in before nightfall. Love you. She closed her eyes, letting the voice wash over her, trying to remember the sound of laughter, of footsteps in the hall of the way he'd say her name. Sometimes the voice on the recorder was all that kept her from dissolving into the endless white noise of loss. When the message ended, she sat in silence for a long time, staring at the Yukon map. The red X glared back at her, vivid as fresh blood. 3 years. People said grief faded, but for her it was a constant pressure, like the air before a blizzard waiting to break. She had learned to carry it the same way she carried the memory of Liam's smile, the warmth of his hand on her back, the weight of his secrets. She stood, taking the coffee mug in both hands, and walked to the window. She looked out at the city, endless gray and indifferent. Somewhere beneath all that snow, Liam's story had ended. Or so everyone believed. Rachel pressed her forehead to the glass, breath fogging the pain. She watched the clouds drift over the city, heavy with more snow, and wondered if it was possible for hope to survive this long. Or if hope was just another word for denial. But then, as the sky grew lighter and the first faint warmth of morning seeped into the kitchen, she looked back at the map. The X was still there, sharp and accusatory. She pressed her fingers to the glass, then to the place on the map where Liam had vanished, her eyes burning with unshed tears. 3 years of silence. 3 years of ritual and remembering, and never really believing what she'd been told. She whispered to the empty room, voice barely more than a breath. I'm not giving up. Not yet. And outside, the world began again, indifferent to grief, to hope, to the quiet promise of a woman who refused to forget. Some discoveries arrive quietly, shrouded in bureaucracy and paperwork, slipping through the cracks of official channels. Others arrive like a fist on a frozen window, shattering certainty with a single blow. The day the compass was found, the Yukon sky was steel gray, swollen with snow, a breath away from another storm. 3 men from the Geological Survey trudged across the ridge boots, crunching in the permafrost, eyes fixed on the data screens strapped to their arms. They weren't looking for ghosts. They were looking for mineral seams, iron, copper, hints of gold in the rock. But when Dave Proctor's boot caught on something hard, he knelt, brushed the snow aside, and there it was, a battered brass compass. Its face cracked, its lid jammed shut, half swallowed by the earth. He turned it over in his gloved hand. The initials LK were barely visible, scratched into the base. For a moment, Dave just stared, a chill crawling up the back of his neck. He'd heard the stories: Keller, the agent who vanished. The avalanche no one saw. The search that was called off too soon. Dave had never believed in closure. He'd worked in the Yukon too long for that. He slipped the compass into a plastic bag and radioed it in. The team would log it as a lost personal item, turn it over to the Survey Corps office in Whitehorse, and forget about it by next week. That's how these things went. But the compass had its own idea of destiny. It waited patient and silent to be noticed by the right pair of eyes. 3 days later, the package arrived at the Survey Corps processing room. Just another curiosity in a city full of lost things. The technician assigned to inventory artifacts was young, meticulous, and far too smart to believe that fate was random. Her name was Emily Greaves, and she recognized the initials immediately. She hesitated, thumb tracing the gouged letters before she reached out just once against every rule she'd been taught, and called a number from an old contact list tucked away on a yellowing sticky note. Rachel Keller. Emergency only. Rachel was sitting at her kitchen table, eyes red from another night of not sleeping, when the phone rang. She didn't recognize the number, but something in her chest tightened anyway. She answered on the second ring, her voice rough. "Hello?" There was a pause, then a whisper. "Mrs. Keller, you don't know me, but I knew Liam. You need to come to Whitehorse. Something's been found. Something you should see before anyone else." Rachel's hands trembled. She barely remembered the words she used to book the flight, how she threw clothes in a bag, how the city blurred behind her as the taxi sped through the dawn, how the airport's fluorescent lights made her feel both exposed and invisible. The flight north was a memory stitched from nerves and half-prayers. Snowdrifts slipping past the window, the land below a blank page, waiting for truth to be written on it. In Whitehorse, Emily met her in the shadows of the arrivals hall. A parka zipped to her chin, anxious eyes darting between Rachel and the unmarked envelope in her gloved hands. "Mrs. Keller," she said, "come with me. We don't have much time." They didn't speak much on the ride through the city. Emily's hands were tight on the wheel, knuckles white. "There's a protocol," she said at last. "But I knew Liam. He used to talk to us, the younger staff, about what to do when the official story doesn't fit. He said to trust your instincts. That's what I'm doing." At the survey lab, the security guard eyed Rachel's credentials, then buzzed them through. Emily led her down a narrow corridor past racks of labeled artifacts, each tagged and cataloged, a silent inventory of the North's forgotten things. She unlocked a small side room and closed the door behind them. On the table under harsh fluorescent lights, the compass looked impossibly small. Rachel reached out, fingertips hovering. "LK," she whispered. Emily nodded. "We checked the inside. It was jammed, but when we forced it, something rattled." She handed Rachel a pair of tweezers. Rachel opened the compass carefully, every muscle in her arm taut with anticipation. Inside the broken housing behind the shattered glass was a sliver of black plastic, a micro SD card. No label, just a smear of copper where the contacts caught the light. Rachel stared at it, her pulse roaring in her ears. She didn't ask permission. She just slipped the card into the slot on Emily's laptop, heart in her throat, afraid of what she'd find, more afraid of what she wouldn't. The computer blinked. Password protected. Emily glanced at Rachel. Any ideas? Rachel's mind spun through years of private jokes and half-spoken promises. Then it hit her, the phrase he'd inscribed on his mug, the phrase that haunted her mornings. She typed, "Let's get lost." The folder opened. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a stream of files spilled across the screen. There were satellite images, snow-blurred shots of roads and camps' coordinates tagged in red. There were documents, spreadsheets, lists of names, shipments, routes traced from Vancouver up to small icy airstrips in the Yukon. There were scans of IDs, photos of men and women, some smiling, some unsmiling, all caught by a lens that saw too much. But the thing that stopped Rachel cold was a document tagged in bold transport biolotus. Asset transfer logs. She clicked. Pages upon pages scrolled by entries stamped with government codes, aliases, transfers, numbers that meant nothing to anyone but Liam and now Rachel. But she could sense the pattern behind the jargon: shipment dates, medical equipment, cold storage vials, lots and lots of vials marked with serials and destination codes that matched secret airstrips and abandoned warehouses. Rachel's hand shook as she scrolled. She remembered late-night conversations, Liam's voice tight and tired. "They're hiding something, Rach. Not just the usual politics. This goes deeper." She'd thought it was paranoia, the cost of his work, the stress finally wearing him thin. Now each line of data was a stone dropped into the pit of her stomach. She opened another folder. Video files. Surveillance footage, grainy and silent men in white coats loading crates into trucks under floodlights. Another shot in a rain-soaked alley as two figures exchanged a briefcase and a nod. A third, a blurry close-up of a logo BioLotus Pharmaceuticals. Her mouth went dry. BioLotus was a name she knew only vaguely, a company with a glowing PR department and a reputation for miracle drugs. But here the word had a new meaning. Code names, aliases, hidden transfer logs. She leaned forward. Another folder, personal notes. Her eyes blurred as she clicked. A document opened, Liam's writing clipped, direct, precise. Transport routes overlap with prior trafficking cases. Intel suggests BioLotus front for illegal research. Suspect asset movement via old mining roads. If anything happens to me, follow the money, not the headlines. She stared at the words, her breath coming ragged. Liam hadn't wandered into an accident. He'd been following a trail that led straight into the heart of something monstrous. Emily was silent, watching the storm behind Rachel's eyes. "What is it?" she whispered. Rachel tried to speak, but her voice failed her. She shook her head, swallowing tears. He wasn't lost. He was chasing this. They covered it up. They lied to everyone. To me. The room felt smaller, the air thinner. Rachel saw in her mind's eye the avalanche report, the closed investigation. She saw again the look on Liam's face before he left. Not just determination, but fear. He'd known. He'd left her the map, the compass, the clues. He'd trusted her to finish what he started. Her heart ached, a wild mixture of grief, rage, and something sharper, a resolve that pressed all the way to her bones. She turned back to Emily, eyes burning. "I need copies of all of this, now, before anyone finds out I was here." Emily nodded, quick and silent, pulling out a thumb drive, copying files with trembling hands. "Take it," she said. "Liam helped me once. It's the least I can do." Rachel closed the compass, slipping the card into her pocket, the drive clutched tight in her palm. She glanced at the cracked brass, the initials that would not fade, and felt the weight of what was to come. There would be no going back now. Not for her, not for the truth. Outside, the Yukon wind howled, rattling the lab windows, carrying with it the scent of snow and secrets waiting to be unearthed. Rachel squared her shoulders, wiped her eyes, and stepped into the storm, knowing at last that Liam Keller hadn't died by chance. He died for a reason, one she would tear from the frozen silence if it killed her. And somewhere behind the cold and the lies, the story was just beginning to thaw. The roads leading north were slick with ice, and the world outside Rachel's windshield was nothing but endless gray sky and the white blaze of snow unbroken as far as she could see. Each mile put distance between her and the life she'd forced herself to accept, and pulled her closer to a world built from Liam's secrets and last wishes. Rachel gripped the steering wheel, knuckles pale. The rental SUV groaned over frozen ruts as she passed the city limits of Whitehorse, heading toward the coordinates hidden on Liam's microSD. The air in the car was stale thick with anticipation and fear, but she kept moving, one eye on the GPS, the other on the empty highway. Wind buffeted the car, carrying with it the wild, restless energy of a land that had never surrendered its mysteries. She drove in silence, radio off 2/10 for music or news. In the passenger seat, Liam's battered compass sat like an oracle. The brass cracked, but the initials still shining in the pale light. She felt the weight of it, a strange reassurance, the sense that maybe he was with her in spirit, if not in body, watching her inch closer to the truth. A flash of memory flickered her. And Liam years ago, bundled in parkas and laughing, their faces young and fearless, cheeks flushed by Yukon wind and first love. She saw his hand reaching for hers on a hiking trail. Heard his voice teasing her about losing her way. "Don't worry, Rach, I'll always find you." He'd set, his eyes bright with promise. But the present pressed in, sharp and cold. She pressed harder on the gas, the engine humming beneath her, as the trees blurred by black skeletons against the snow. The world here was vast, indifferent, and more beautiful than she remembered, just as Liam had always said. "The North doesn't care about your plans," he'd told her once, smile tinged with something sad. "It keeps its secrets until you're ready to hear them." An hour out of Whitehorse, Rachel pulled over at a lonely rest stop. Her fingers shook as she reached for her phone. She scrolled through old messages, photos of Liam at the cabin, silly selfies, lists of groceries, and one voicemail marked as saved, the last he ever left her. She hit play, heart pounding. "Hey, it's me. Signal's rough, sorry, I'm almost at the ridge. If you get this, I just wanted to say," Static crackled, swallowing his words. Then, "Don't worry if I'm late. It's nothing, just something I have to check on. I'll call soon. Love you." Rachel listened, twice eyes squeezed shut, willing his voice to be clearer, the message to go on longer, the story to end differently. But that was all there was. A farewell without saying goodbye. She closed her eyes and let herself slip into memory flashes of laughter, kisses in snow. The warm thrum of his heartbeat against her ear in the middle of the night. Scenes played in reverse time, unraveling, pulling her back to when hope was easy and the world still made sense. The cold snapped her back. She took a deep breath, started the car, and drove on. By mid-morning, the mountains loomed larger, the sky bruised and threatening. Her GPS signaled she was getting close, just a few kilometers from the coordinates that had haunted her dreams for 3 years. She parked at the side of a barely plowed road, packed her bagwater first aid, Liam's compass, and the thumb drive from the lab, and stepped into the wilderness. The trees closed around her branches, heavy with snow, muffling every sound. Each step crunched loudly, her breath pluming out in front of her as she followed the route Liam had marked in his notes. She checked her compass, out of habit, out of faith. Watching the needle waver settle point her deeper into the unknown. The woods felt alive, as if watching her. Shadows shifted in the corners of her eyes. Every now and then she stopped, heart racing, sure she'd heard footsteps behind her, a whisper of movement in the frozen air. But there was nothing, only the wind and the memory of a promise not to give up. At last she reached the ridge, a sweep of stone rising above a frozen river, the exact spot Liam's data had led her to. She stood at the edge, looking out over the emptiness, the sky wide and endless, feeling both impossibly small and fiercely alive. She whispered his name, letting it disappear into the wild. She pulled out her phone, opened the thumb drive, and stared at the files again. Shipments, faces, that single word, Bio-Lotus. She needed help, needed someone who understood the world. Liam had died for someone who could read between the lines. There was only one person who came to mind. She hesitated, then dialed. The call rang twice before a familiar voice picked up, gruff, wary, but undeniably warm. "Rachel, Jesus, it's been years. You okay?" "Noah, I need to see you." A pause heavy with things unsaid. "Where are you?" "In the Yukon, at the ridge. I found something of Liam's." There was silence, then a sigh. "All right. I'm in Vancouver. Meet me tomorrow." "But Rachel, whatever you think you found, be careful. There are things you don't want to get mixed up in." She could hear the fear in his voice, the edge of something dangerous. "I don't have a choice, Noah. He left me a trail." Another pause. "I'll send you the address." She hung up, heart racing, the cold no longer biting, but burning with purpose. She glanced at Liam's compass, then at the snowy expanse below. Somewhere in this landscape, the truth waited, dangerous, hidden, maybe even deadly. She squared her shoulders and made her way back to the car. That night, in a cheap motel on the outskirts of Vancouver, Rachel lay awake, the ceiling stained by the glow of passing headlights. The city's noise was distant, drowned by her own thoughts. She clutched the compass in her hand, thumb running over the broken seam. She closed her eyes and let herself remember. She and Liam, in the early days, young, fearless, sharing secrets beneath a sky ablaze with northern lights. His laughter echoing off cabin walls, the taste of campfire smoke on his lips, his arms wrapped around her to ward off the cold. She remembered the vows they'd made, half serious, half joking, about never keeping secrets, about always coming home. But Liam had kept secrets. He'd hidden things not just from her, but from the world. She saw again the look in his eyes the week before he left. A flicker of doubt, a question he never voiced. She'd pressed him for answers, but he'd only smiled, kissed her forehead, and promised to be back by Christmas. Now Christmases had come and gone, and she was the one chasing his ghost through snow and shadow. The next morning, Rachel found herself at a sleek glass building downtown, the Bio-Lotus logo etched discreetly on the lobby wall. She signed in under a false name one Liam had taught her, back in the days when subterfuge was a game, not a lifeline. The receptionist made a call, and soon Noah appeared taller than she remembered, hair going gray at the temples. Eyes alert and searching. He hugged her tightly, then pulled back to study her face. "You look tired," he said, gentle. "I haven't slept in 3 years," she replied, voice flat. He led her to a quiet cafe around the corner, away from prying ears. They sat in a booth by the window, steam fogging the glass, the world outside blurred and indistinct. Rachel wasted no time. She slid the compass and the drive across the table. "He left these. I found data bio Lotus shipments, asset transfers, surveillance photos. He was tracking something bad." Noah's face hardened as he scrolled through the files. "Damn it, Liam," he whispered. "You always had to play hero." Rachel watched him carefully. "You work here. Did you know?" He shook his head. "Not like this. I thought it was all above board, maybe some creative accounting, some patents. But this, human trials, illegal research." His hands trembled. "You need to let this go, Rachel. These people, they're dangerous. You don't know what you're walking into." She leaned in, her voice low and fierce. "He's dead because of this, Noah. They killed him, covered it up. I can't just walk away." Noah hesitated, pain flickering across his features. "You think you're the first to try? I've seen people disappear, Rachel. Smart people, good people. They vanish and the world keeps turning. I told Liam the same thing. Be careful, know when to stop." But he never listened. Rachel stared at him, searching his face for answers, for a hint of betrayal or guilt. "Did you help him?" He looked away. "I gave him access, nothing that could get traced back to me. I thought he'd just file a report, blow the whistle, move on. I didn't know he'd dig this deep." She swallowed anger and grief twisting inside her. "What do I do, Noah?" He met her gaze, eyes shadowed by regret. "There are things you shouldn't touch. Things you can't unsee. If you keep going, they'll come after you too." She gathered up the compass and drive, her resolve hardening. Let them try. As she left, she glanced back at Noah, his silhouette slumped against the window, the weight of old loyalties pressing down. Rachel stepped into the Vancouver rain, Liam's compass warm in her pocket, ready to follow the trail wherever it led, whatever the cost. The hunt had begun, and she would not run. Not until the truth was found. Rachel left the cafe unsettled. The Vancouver rain had grown harder, each drop cold and sharp against her face as she stepped into the street. She turned her collar up, pulling the hood over her hair, and tried to disappear into the movement of the city. Noah's warnings echoed in her ears, but there was something else there too. A fracture in his voice, a flicker in his eyes. He had lied to her. She felt it in her bones. She returned to her hotel, the kind of modern, nondescript building designed to make travelers forget where they were. She paused in the lobby, scanning faces, but no one paid her any attention. Just another woman clutching her bag, sleep-deprived and invisible. The elevator was empty. She pressed the button for the 6th floor and watched the numbers climb, her heart pounding harder with each floor. Inside her room, she locked the door, wedging a chair beneath the handle, a habit from years of listening to Liam's stories, of living with the knowledge that the world was never as safe as it seemed. She dropped her bag on the bed and sat in the armchair by the window, knees drawn to her chest, watching the city blur behind the streaming glass. She needed to know the truth. About Liam, about Noah, about Bio Lotus, and whatever secrets Liam had uncovered that were worth killing for. She pulled out her laptop, inserted the thumb drive, and began combing through the files again. Data scrolled past shipment logs, emails, video clips. But there was something she hadn't noticed before, a folder labeled Vox. She clicked it open. Inside was a single audio file, date stamped 3 days before Liam's disappearance. Her stomach twisted as she hit play. At first there was only static, then Liam's voice hushed and tense. "They're closer than I thought. If you're listening, I've sent the files. Don't trust anyone." Especially static swallowed the words. In the background, Rachel caught another voice, muffled as if in another room. She rewound and played the segment again. The voice was familiar, deeper controlled, clipped in the way of someone used to holding secrets. It was Noah. She froze, listening to the grainy sound of her husband and his oldest friend. She couldn't make out every word, but one phrase landed with the force of a bullet. DNA vectors. Weaponize. Vancouver transfer. Rachel paused the recording, her blood turning to ice. Noah was involved somehow, some way. He was part of this. Had he betrayed Liam? Was he protecting himself by warning her away, or protecting the organization? Her heart hammered. She couldn't afford to be naive. She played the rest of the audio hands, shaking, Liam's voice more urgent. I know what you're doing. You can't hide it forever. Noah, you don't understand, Liam. This is bigger than either of us. If you keep digging, you'll get both of us killed. Another burst of static, a scuffle, the sound of footsteps, then silence. Rachel sat back, the city spinning behind her eyes. She forced herself to focus. Liam had found something about human DNA, about weaponization, about a transfer happening here in Vancouver. Noah wasn't just an informant. He was a handler, maybe a facilitator. He was working both sides. She copied the audio file to her phone, then grabbed Liam's compass from her bag. She twisted the base as he'd once shown her, and felt the hidden compartment click open. Inside was an old battered wristwatch, his lucky watch she'd called it, though he'd always insisted luck was just preparation in disguise. The band was scuffed, the face scratched. She turned it over and saw the faint, almost invisible seam he'd etched into the back. With the tip of her nail file, she pried it open. Inside was a tiny flash drive no bigger than a fingernail. She plugged it into her laptop, holding her breath. Another folder opened, red line. Inside were lab reports, coded correspondences, and a series of scanned notebooks. Liam's handwriting, all block capitals, notes about Project Cerberus, subject genome, and viral delivery systems. There were diagrams, molecular structures, vectors, population models. She didn't understand all of it, but she understood enough. This was about bioweapons, about using gene editing to make viruses target specific DNA profiles. At the bottom of the folder was a scanned letter. Liam's handwriting was hurried, slanted. If you're reading this, Rach, I was right. BioLotus isn't just a front. They're developing next-gen bioweapons using stolen DNA data from clinics and ancestry databases. They're prepping a test run. Don't trust Noah. Don't trust anyone. Get this to someone outside Canada. Get it to the press. Don't try to be a hero. I love you. Tears blurred her vision. She bit down on her lip, refusing to cry. There wasn't time for it. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. Rachel froze, every muscle tensing. She closed the files, ejected, the drive, slipped them into her pocket. She glanced at the door, the chair still in place, but there was movement beneath the gap. Shadows. The faint click of metal. Someone was picking the lock. She backed away from the door, scanning the room for a weapon. Nothing but a lamp, the heavy ceramic base, maybe enough to buy her a second. She heard the lock turn, the chair scraping slightly as pressure mounted from the other side. She moved to the bathroom, phone in hand, and dialed emergency services, but there was no signal. A shadow passed across the frosted glass. Then a boot kicked the door hard enough to send the chair skittering across the floor. The door burst open. Two men, faces obscured by caps and jackets, entered quickly and quietly. Professionals, not random thieves. Rachel slammed the bathroom door and locked it, bracing her back against the porcelain sink. Her mind raced. Liam's watch. There had to be something. She ripped off the back again, feeling for wires. She pressed the stem in twice, as he'd shown her, once half-joking years ago. Double press for emergencies, kiddo. A red light blinked. A faint buzz vibrated in her palm. Outside, the men pounded the door. Open it, Rachel. No one wants to hurt you. Just give us what you found. She didn't answer. She fumbled with the watch, feeling the sides for another switch. The buzz grew stronger. Then a tiny needle slid out from the side of the band. She pressed it into the wall. Instantly, an electrical charge pulsed out, frying the circuits in the bathroom's old wiring, blacking out the lights, disabling the electronic locks. The pounding grew frantic. The hinges started to give. Rachel slipped out the bathroom window, landing hard on the fire escape, clutching Liam's watch and the drives. Below, rain-soaked alleyways glimmered with streetlight. She climbed down, hands scraping metal, breath ragged. She landed in a puddle, knees aching, and ducked behind a dumpster. She heard shouts above footsteps on the metal stairs, but she was already running, sprinting into the labyrinth of alleys behind the hotel. She kept moving, heart-hammering boots sliding in the slick. Her mind was a tangle of fear and adrenaline. Liam's voice whispered in her ear. "Preparation is survival, Rach. You can do this." She darted into the mouth of a parking garage, pressing herself behind a concrete pillar, chest heaving. She watched the street eyes wide for pursuers. 2 men appeared, scanning the lot, speaking into radios. One flashed a badge, private security, not police. Not here to help. Rachel held her breath, pressing herself flatter against the pillar, willing herself to become invisible. The men walked past, eyes sharp but hurried. Rain beat down harder, drowning their voices. After a minute, they moved on, and Rachel slipped out, keeping to the shadows. She ducked into a 24-hour diner 3 blocks away, hands shaking as she ordered black coffee, paying cash, and keeping her face averted from the security camera above the counter. She sat in the farthest booth, shoulders hunched, clutching the mug for warmth. Her mind replayed the recording, Noah's voice, Liam's warning. Trust no one. She checked her phone, no signal. The drives in her pocket felt like live wires. She knew she couldn't go back to the hotel. Her face was probably already flagged. She needed to get out of Vancouver. Fast. She scribbled a note on a napkin. If I don't make it, Bio Lotus Project Cerberus Vancouver transfer. Get this to the press. Liam Keller. She tucked it beneath the coffee cup, a feeble insurance policy. Rachel left the diner by the back door, melting into the city's dark, wet maze. The compass in one hand, the drives in her coat, Liam's voice a constant guide. Don't stop. Don't trust. Don't wait. She knew now Noah had betrayed Liam. The threat was bigger than she'd imagined. But she also knew something else. The truth was within her reach, and she would not stop until she pulled it, kicking and screaming, into the light, even if it cost her everything. In the distance, sirens wailed. The city moved on, indifferent to secrets and heartbreak. But Rachel was already gone, racing through the night, the storm, and the impossible weight of her own determination. The forest that sprawled at the edge of British Columbia was a place of silence, ancient and unmoved by human drama. Pines crowded the roadside like sentinels, their branches knitted together, blocking out much of the weak daylight. Rachel drove along the potholed track, the only vehicle for miles, each turn deeper into a world that felt carved out of another century. The rain that had followed her since Vancouver was thinning now, but a heavy mist clung to the trunks, veiling everything in gray. She'd found the location from a line of numbers on Liam's encrypted drive coordinates and a simple note. Old Mill, do not approach alone. A ghost of a smile had tugged at her lips as she read it. Alone was the only way she could go. She'd mapped the place, once a forestry outpost, then a private research facility, closed down in the late 90s and shuttered ever since. Locals told stories of lights at night, of trucks with covered cargo, but nobody cared enough to dig. In these remote parts of BC, secrets could stay buried for decades. Rachel pulled off the track and hid the car behind a fallen log, far enough from the entrance that any casual searcher would miss it. She killed the engine, heart drumming in her chest, and sat for a moment, letting the quiet settle over her. The only sound was her own breath, quick in the stillness. She reached for Liam's compass, running her thumb along the crack, feeling for courage. The needle pointed north, unwavering, toward the shape of the facility she could barely make out through the mist. She double-checked her backpack, water gloves, headlamp, the drives. Liam's watch. She pulled up her hood and stepped into the undergrowth, feet sinking into moss and needles, the chill biting through her jeans. It was colder here than in the city, colder even than the Yukon. Not just the temperature, but a kind of emotional frost, as if the air itself remembered the things done here. The mill rose out of the fog, like the skeleton of some extinct beast, rusted corrugated metal, caved-in roof, glassless windows staring blankly at the forest. Weeds clawed up through the cracks in the pavement, and tangled blackberry vines claimed the fences. A faded sign, half-eaten by rust, read, Pacific Genomic Research, authorized personnel only. She moved quietly, boots crunching on gravel, every step echoing too loudly in her ears. The main entrance was padlocked, but the side door hung askew, pried open years ago and never fixed. Rachel slipped inside, heart thudding. She clicked her headlamp on the beam, slicing through the gloom, illuminating dust motes that swirled like memories. The building was empty of life, but not of stories. Graffiti curled along the walls in angry colors. Abandoned desks and lab tables lay scattered, covered in thick blankets of dust. She moved deeper, the silence broken only by her footsteps and the distant drip of water leaking from the ceiling. Her breath clouded in the beam of the lamp, silver and fleeting. She tried not to think of the stories she'd heard of people who entered these places and never came out, of security contractors who cleaned up loose ends for corporations with too much to lose. Every door she pushed open revealed another layer of the past. Old lab coats, yellowed with age, hung from pegs on the wall. Microscopes sat on benches, lenses fogged slides still loaded with ancient specimens. In one office, a calendar from 1999 was pinned above a stack of dusty notebooks. She traced her gloved finger along the spine's handwritten labels: Trial A23 Vector Insertion Phase 2, Primate Results Field Transmission Models. She set the bag on a desk and flipped through a notebook, pages filled with cramped handwriting and chemical diagrams. She made out references to gene cassettes, targeted expression delivery efficiency. There were charts showing rapid infection curves, mortality rates, mutation frequencies. Some pages were heavily redacted lines, blacked out with marker. At the bottom of one, a scrawl: If successful human trials Q2 2000, seek clearance from parent company. The company logo, Bio Lotus. The stylized lotus flower appeared again and again in the margins. Her hands shook as she turned the pages. This was it, proof that the place was never just a mill, never just a research site. It was an incubator for something far darker. She pressed on, drawn by a noise she couldn't place, a faint mechanical hum just on the edge of hearing. She followed it through corridors papered with peeling hazard signs. The hum led her to a stairwell, metal steps slick with condensation. She descended, boots clanging. The lower level was colder still, the concrete walls sweating the air tinged with the scent of bleach and rot. At the bottom, she found a series of locked doors. The first was labeled Level 2, Access Only. The lock was simple, old, rusted. She broke it with a rock, flinching at the echo. Inside, the room was filled with file cabinets, the floor littered with shredded paper and glass slides. She rifled through the drawers, finding folder after folder: Cerberus Project, prion vectors, transgenic protocols. She snapped photos with her phone, stuffing anything portable into her bag. One folder marked Subject 0. Genomic implantation trials stopped her cold. She flipped it open. Inside were medical records, blood panels, x-rays, handwritten notes. Human subjects numbered, not named. Failed integration. Subject expired 12 years post-injection. Partial success. Subject exhibits enhanced resistance to infection. Next to the notes were photos, people in hospital gowns, eyes, vacant skin marked with surgical scars. Rachel's stomach lurched. She pressed on, determined to find the heart of this place. She found it down the next hallway, a room set apart by a thick steel door, left ajar as if someone had left in a hurry. She pushed it open, heart pounding. The walls inside were lined with freezers, their power-long dead doors propped open, racks of empty vials scattered across the floor. On a bench, a stack of research logs, plastic sleeves protecting faded printouts. She scanned the documents by headlamp. One page read, Phase 3 targeted viral delivery using retrofitted cold virus engineered to carry programmable genetic payload. Goal: induce permanent heritable changes in host genome. Test species: non-human primates, planned escalation to human volunteers with acceptable risk profile. The next page was worse, cross-referenced with DNA collected from clinics, blood banks, ancestry registries. Model suggests high viability for population targeting. She looked up, breath shallow. The implications unspooled in her mind, using viruses to rewrite the DNA of entire populations under the guise of treatment or public health. The power to select, to modify, to destroy. She dug deeper, searching for a name, a signature. In the final logbook, she found a familiar scrawl, Liam's handwriting. Rachel, if you find this, I was right. Bio Lotus never stopped the trials. They just moved them underground. There's a master list. Look for Lotus Seed Archive in the network room. Get the files. Tell the world. She let the words settle, her pulse racing. Somewhere in this labyrinth was the evidence Liam had died for. She turned to go, the echo of her own footsteps multiplying behind her, bouncing off tile and steel. She paused in a wide corridor, listening. Her breath was ragged, too loud in the hush. In that cold emptiness, her memories came unbidden. Liam at their kitchen table, scribbling in his notebook. Brow furrowed. His hand on her shoulder, steady and reassuring even when he was afraid. The way he'd always pause before a risk, weighing the odds, never reckless, only brave. She heard footsteps, not her own, someone else in the building. Or just the ghosts of the past. She ducked into a storage closet, heart-hammering, flashlight off. In the blackness, she counted to 30, then risked a glance through the crack. Nothing but darkness and dust. She made her way back, nerves taut, every sound a threat. In the main lab, she found an old computer tower, cables trailing across the bench. The screen was dark, but the power supply buzzed faintly. Someone had been here recently. She searched the drawers for a clue and found a keycard with the Lotus logo and a posted archive, access 4th floor, north wing. She pocketed the card, determination flaring inside her. She'd come this far, she couldn't turn back now. She slipped from room to room, taking photos of everything. Gene editing models pinned to whiteboards, lists of research subjects, contracts stamped, confidential emails between BioLotus and shadowy government addresses. The weight of evidence grew heavy in her pack. But heavier still was the feeling of being watched, as if the walls themselves remembered every secret whispered, every betrayal enacted under the guise of science. Every time she paused to breathe, the air seemed to pulse with the ghosts of all those who'd suffered here. Finally, she reached the north wing. The corridor was long and empty, her footsteps echoing down the tiled floor. She found the door marked Lotus Seed Archive, swiped the keycard, and slipped inside. The archive was smaller than she expected. A server rack, a locked cabinet, a work table littered with external hard drives and flash sticks. She set to work quickly, searching for anything labeled master list or human subjects. In the bottom drawer, she found a drive marked with the same scrawl as Liam's last note. She pocketed it, not daring to examine the contents here. She turned to leave, the weight of her discoveries pressing down on her. The air in the corridor seemed colder, heavier with every step. As she slipped out the side door and into the woods, she let the silence close behind her, the only witness to what she'd uncovered. Rachel didn't look back as the mists swallowed her. The evidence in her pack was damning. But she knew the most dangerous part of her journey still lay ahead. And somewhere out there, the men who'd killed Liam would not let the truth go easily. But she had what she came for. And now, the fight was hers. The woods swallowed her up, but the secrets she carried were burning, desperate to be brought into the light. Rachel's pulse thudded in her ears as she stumbled out of the archive, the cold corridor stretching endlessly in both directions. The drive in her pocket felt as heavy as a brick. She forced herself not to run, to keep her pace steady, to not betray her desperation to any unseen cameras or watchers. In the emptiness of the abandoned facility, every sound seemed amplified, her own breathing. The creak of her boots, the distant moan of the wind, winding its way through broken window panes and rotted beams. She slipped into a deserted office, heart hammering, and locked the door behind her. Light filtered in through the fogged glass, casting long stripes across the cracked linoleum. Her hands trembled as she pulled out her phone, opened the camera, and began snapping pictures of everything. Folders, lab logs, whiteboards, anything she hadn't already documented. The weight of what she carried and what she'd seen threatened to overwhelm her, but she pushed it aside. She had to keep moving. There was an old desktop computer on the desk, the kind with a humming tower and a scratched-up monitor. The login screen blinked at her, a default username and password sticker curling up at the edge of the keyboard. She typed them in, the machine word-to-life screen flickering through lines of code and icons before settling into a simple, bare-bones desktop. Rachel dug the stolen drive from her bag and plugged it in, every muscle taut, half expecting alarms to start blaring. Nothing happened except a window popping open with a list of files. She scanned them, heart in her throat, research logs, experimental data funding spreadsheets. Then, almost at the bottom, a folder marked Personnel, Active Subjects. Her breath caught. She opened it. Inside were a series of scan files, cryptically named numbers and letters, no actual names. She clicked the first one, and a black and white scan of a fingerprint appeared. The next, a retinal image. The third, a full-face scan, blurry and grainy, but unmistakable. Rachel stared, unable to breathe. Liam. Older, gaunter hair, longer and streaked with gray, but undeniably him. There was a timestamp just 3 months old. A line of data beneath the photo status live. Facility hold. Sequence AB8K7. There was no mention of death, no clinical detachment, just live, as stark and cold as the concrete walls surrounding her. For a moment she was paralyzed, tears welling in her eyes. Her legs gave out, and she slid to the floor, phone clattering beside her. She pressed the heel of her hand against her mouth, fighting back the sobs that threatened to burst free. He was alive. Not a ghost, not a memory. Liam was alive somewhere in the network of this monstrous organization. 1,000 memories flashed in her mind. Fragments sharp as broken glass, Liam's smile, his hands cradling her face. The way he'd say her name low and gentle in the dark. She'd mourned him for 3 years, buried him in dreams and sleepless nights, only to find the hope she'd forbidden herself to feel suddenly burning so bright it was painful. She swiped through the files, frantic. More biometric scans, all dated within the last year. Blood work, tissue samples, medical observations. Liam was being monitored, studied, maybe experimented on. There was an intake note. Subject displays high resistance to viral vector. Mental state defiant. Sedation partial. Security high. Anger surged through her grief. They hadn't just taken him. They were using him. Treating him like a lab animal, a data point. She punched the desk, knuckles splitting, blood spotting the faded veneer. The pain anchored her. She wiped her eyes, forced herself to focus. She scrolled further, searching for clues, facility addresses, contact names, anything. But the data was scrubbed clean. No location, no clear sign of where Liam was held. Only the sequence code, AB8K7. She copied everything to her phone, then to a backup drive. She'd get these to the authorities, to the press, anyone who would listen. Suddenly, a soft, mechanical whir cut through the silence overhead. Rachel froze, listening, breath shallow. She looked up. The ceiling was made of drop tiles, some stained and warped, a few slightly ajar. She heard a faint scratching, a click, the tap of something plastic against tile. Then, with a soft, papery flutter, a folded scrap of paper drifted down from a crack between the panels, landing at her feet. Rachel stared at it, chest tight. She glanced around. No footsteps, no voices, just the sound of wind and the creaks of a dying building. With trembling hands, she unfolded the note. The writing was blocky, hurried black marker, each letter jagged. Stop now or end up like him. CD. Rachel's heart slammed in her chest. CD. The initials. The warning Liam had whispered in his notes. The traitor, the handler, the shadow pulling the strings from somewhere close by. She read the note again, knuckles whitening. Her mind spun through every possible scenario. How long had she been watched? Was it Noah? Someone else? Were they in the building right now, or just leaving messages from afar? She scanned the ceiling for a camera, a sensor, anything, but saw only the rotten squares and the flickering light. She could feel herself beginning to shake, not with fear, not entirely, but with a surge of something else, raw and desperate. 3 years she'd lived in the aftermath of a lie, had mourned her husband, had been told to let go. Move on, trust the official story. And all that time, Liam was alive, suffering alone, waiting for someone to find him. Rage overtook her, trembling. She crumpled the note, tears running hot down her face. No, she whispered, voice trembling but hardening with each syllable. You don't get to threaten me. Not anymore. Not after this. She stood, chest heaving, and faced the broken window. Outside, the forest stretched to the horizon, shrouded in mist and shadows. She pressed a hand to the glass, as if she could send strength to wherever Liam was. If he's still alive, she said aloud, I'm going to bring him back. I don't care what it takes. She wiped the tears away, rage crystallizing into resolve. This was bigger than just her and Liam, bigger than BioLotus, bigger than all the secrets hidden in the archives of this forgotten place. But right now it was as personal as it could be. She would find him. She would bring him home. She moved through the office, collecting the drives and folders. Every sense heightened now, each sound sharper, every shadow a threat. She paused at the door, listening for footsteps, for the creak of a board or the scrape of a shoe. Nothing. She retraced her steps down the hall, heart thudding in her chest. As she reached the stairwell, she paused and looked back at the office, at the crumpled warning note lying on the floor. She took a photo of it for evidence for herself. CD's threat would be the last thing she was afraid of. Descending into the building's main lab, she tried to steady her breathing. The cold, sterile air bit at her skin. She replayed the data in her mind sequence code live status, the look on Liam's face in that scan. He was alive. She clung to that thought like a lifeline. A sudden clang echoed from somewhere in the bowels of the building. Rachel froze, pressing herself into the shadow of the stairwell. She listened, body taut as a wire. Voices muffled, distant. 2, maybe 3 people. She heard a name, her name spoken low, almost a growl. She didn't wait to hear more. She slipped through a maintenance door, heart pounding. The maintenance tunnel was pitch black, thick with the smell of mold and chemical decay. She moved quickly, hands brushing along the damp concrete, following the slight downward slope. At the end, a rusted steel door led out into the woods behind the facility. She pushed it open, the hinges screaming in protest, and stepped into the thick green silence. She was shaking, adrenaline coursing, but her mind was already racing ahead. She had the evidence. She had proof Liam was alive. She had the warning, but that only confirmed she was on the right path. She reached her car and slumped behind the wheel. Tears streaming freely now. Not just grief, but a wild, desperate hope. The world had lied to her, but the truth was still out there. So was Liam. She pressed her forehead to the steering wheel and let herself cry hard and shaking. But when she lifted her head, her eyes were clear. A fierce, unyielding resolve burned in her chest. She gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, and spoke to the empty car, to Liam, to the ghosts of the forest. "I'm coming for you. I swear to God, I'm coming for you." And with that, Rachel started the engine, wiped the last tears from her cheeks, and drove away from the ruins of the past toward whatever danger, whatever hell she had to face to bring Liam home. Nothing and no one would stop her now. Night in the industrial sprawl south of Vancouver was less a darkness than a series of shifting shadows. Sodium lights painting sickly halos over barbed wire fences, trucks rumbling in and out of loading bays, security cameras swiveling in silent arcs. Most people would have seen nothing but a row of aging warehouses empty at this hour and moved on. But Rachel Keller wasn't most people, not anymore, and Juno certainly wasn't. He sat beside her in the rental car, face ghostly in the pale blue glow of 3 open laptops. The tap of his fingers on the keyboard was fast and nervous, a symphony of code. He was Liam's nephew in blood and in stubbornness, only 24, but with the sharp, hungry look of someone who'd been forced to learn distrust the hard way. His hoodie was zipped to the chin curls escaping beneath the edge earbuds, feeding him the thrum of his own makeshift surveillance net. "East Gate infrared motion," he muttered, never taking his eyes off the screen. 3 guards on rotation. This whole place is running off a proprietary network, but the firewall's old school. Give me another 60 seconds. Rachel peered through the windshield at the blackened chain-link fence, the hum of high voltage overhead, the dull fortress-like sprawl of the lab. Somewhere inside, behind layers of concrete and secrecy, Liam Keller was alive. Her hands clenched in her lap, jaw set heart, a wild, erratic thing. They'd spent 2 days preparing. Juno had pieced together the physical blueprints from construction records, mapped the guard routes using drone footage and social engineering, and spoofed employee RFID badges using a kit he'd built in his bedroom years before. Rachel had gone over the plan until every turn, every step, every failsafe was muscle memory. There was no guarantee they'd get even a minute of luck. But after what she'd found in the ruined base, the image of Liam wasted but alive, she would not be stopped. "Ready?" Juno whispered, unplugging 2 laptops and folding them into his bag. He handed Rachel a slim black rectangle, her own fake badge scuffed at the edges to look real. "Stick with me. If anything goes sideways, you follow the red lights to the east fence." There's a 10-second window in the loop. After that, you're on your own. Rachel forced a tight nod. Juno checked the pistol at his hip. She hated that part, but she'd long since lost the luxury of gentleness, then popped the car door, keeping to the shadows as they crossed the cracked asphalt lot. The night was thick with the smell of diesel and rain, and every step sounded impossibly loud to Rachel's ears. At the gate, Juno flicked the badge over the scanner. A soft beep. The latch clicked and the door swung open. They slipped through, hugging the wall. A camera swept by above, but Juno had already looped the feed, a live image of an empty corridor replayed in real time. They ducked behind a dumpster as two guards strolled by, their voices lazy bored. Inside the service entrance, the light was harsh and chemical white tile stretching down long, echoing halls. Juno tapped furiously on a tablet, piggybacking the security system. 3 doors, then a left. Lab C. That's where they're running most of their medical surveillance. Guards patrol every 6 minutes. We've got 5. Rachel's nerves hummed. Adrenaline sharpened every sense. They moved fast down a narrow hallway, past a locked janitor's closet, around the echoing clatter of a vending machine. The corridor opened into a main lab, glass walls revealing racks of servers and equipment, masked techs hunched over monitors. Nobody looked up. They belonged, or at least the illusion held. Juno guided her to a side door. Another badge swipe. This is it. Inside the room was stark and cold stainless steel reflecting harsh fluorescence. Carts of medical gear lined one wall. Glass cabinets held vials and pill bottles. A faint beeping came from a bank of monitors at the far end. In the center of the room, half obscured by shadows strapped to a hospital bed, was Liam Keller. Rachel's knees nearly buckled. He was thinner, his hair longer, his face bruised and stubbled. An IV snaked from his arm to a machine, a monitor tracking every breath and heartbeat. But his eyes were awake, defiant, burning even under the fluorescent glare. She rushed to him, Juno blocking the door, eyes wide. "Uncle Liam." His voice caught. Liam's gaze sharpened, disbelief and hope wrestling on his gaunt features. "Rachel," he croaked, voice raw but strong. "You shouldn't be here." She pressed her hands to his face, tears spilling before she could stop them. "We're getting you out." Juno was already moving, yanking the IV, checking the monitors, pulling out a flash drive, and slotting it into the main console. "I'm copying everything. This is all evidence." He worked with the urgency of someone who knew the clock was ticking. A klaxon began to wail, sharp and shrill, shattering the quiet. Rachel's heart leapt to her throat. "Time's up," Juno hissed. "We go now." Rachel tried to help Liam stand, but his legs gave out. She slung his arm over her shoulders, bearing his weight. Juno opened the emergency door behind it, a red-lit stairwell descending into darkness. Boots thundered in the corridor. A guard appeared in the glass-walled lab, eyes wide as he took in the scene. Juno raised his pistol. "Go, I'll cover." They staggered down the stairs, Rachel half carrying Liam, Juno behind, firing 2 warning shots that ricocheted off metal. The guard dove for cover. Another alarm blared, red lights strobing along the walls. At the bottom, Juno hacked the keypad, hands steady, nerves steel. Almost there. Rachel heard shouts above the pounding of boots. Liam's breath came in ragged gasps, but he managed. Not far. East wing. Old delivery dock. Juno yanked the door open. "Let's go." They burst into an old loading bay, dusty dark, filled with forgotten crates. Rachel dragged Liam through visions swimming with fear and hope. Sirens wailed closer. Flashlights stabbed the dark. A bullet shattered a crate beside them. Juno fired back, shouting, "Cover me!" Rachel pulled Liam behind a stack of pallets. He squeezed her hand. "I knew you'd come," he whispered. She choked out a laugh, tears streaking her face. "I never gave up." Juno rejoined them, dragging a heavy crate to block the doorway. "We have maybe 30 seconds. Through that door outside." I looped the last security camera. "The east fence is your only shot." Rachel helped Liam to his feet. He was shaking but alive, stubbornness burning in his eyes. They limped across the bay, boots skidding on concrete as guards poured into the far door. Juno fired a last shot, then dove through the side door. The 3 of them sprinted, Rachel hauling Liam, Juno clearing the way down a narrow alley lined with dumpsters and broken glass. Shouts echoed behind them, gunfire barked, but the shadows swallowed them. They reached the outer fence. Juno pulled bolt cutters from his backpack, clipped the wire, and shoved the gap wide. Rachel squeezed through, dragging Liam. On the other side was a ravine thick with brambles, but freedom lay just beyond. Rachel looked back. In the red-lit distance, guards scrambled, barking orders. She helped Liam down the slope, Juno right behind, hands bleeding from the wire. They crashed through the brush, breathless hearts pounding until the sirens faded behind them. The only sound was the ragged breath of the three fugitives and the distant rumble of the city that would never know how close it had come to losing its soul. They collapsed in a clearing moonlight, painting silver stripes on their faces. Rachel hugged Liam fiercely, her whole body shaking. "I thought you were gone," she whispered. He pressed his forehead to hers, voice weak but sure. "They couldn't break me. I knew you'd come." Juno knelt beside them, laptop still humming. "We've got everything. Records, proof. We can bring them down." Rachel nodded, wiping her tears, her resolve harder than ever. They had Liam back, but the fight was just beginning. And this time they would face it together. The clearing was a breathless pause. Moonlight trembling on the leaves, hearts beating a battered chorus. For a moment, Rachel thought they'd made it. Juno was still scanning for signals on his phone, his hands shaking when a flicker of red swept across the trees. Rachel barely had time to turn before the shadows leapt into the clearing, half a dozen armed men faces, obscured guns leveled. "Don't move, hands where we can see them." She heard Juno's sharp inhale, felt Liam tense, and in a single instant hope collapsed into cold reality. She lifted her hands, squeezing Liam's arm as he tried to steady himself. She wanted to scream, to fight. But she knew when there were no odds left. The men surged forward, rough hands wrenching her arms behind her back, zip ties biting her wrists. Someone yanked the laptop from Juno, another ripped away the drives. Liam staggered, but stayed on his feet, silent defiance in the set of his jaw. They were marched through the undergrowth, flashlights stabbing the dark, then into the open, the warehouse looming again, implacable, inescapable. Rachel's boots skidded on wet gravel, her mind racing. Was there still time to get word out? Did Juno manage to upload any files? All the evidence, all the risk gone in a moment of moonlit hope. Inside the warehouse was transformed. Floodlights blazed, erasing every shadow. Men in black suits and headsets moved with military precision, barking orders. The air stank of bleach and diesel. Rachel, Liam, and Juno were separated. Rachel shoved into a chair, her face caught in the harsh glare. A hush fell. From the far side of the warehouse, a tall man approached. Steps measured, hands folded behind his back. He was silver-haired, perfectly pressed in a tailored suit, every inch of him exuding command. Rachel recognized him from photographs, from Liam's stories, from nightmares that had haunted her after reading too many of her husband's classified case files. Director Simon Reynolds, former intelligence chief, now CEO and shadow puppet master of BioLotus. Reynolds stopped in front of Rachel, considering her with the dispassion of a scientist regarding a lab rat. His gaze drifted to Liam, who returned it with a barely concealed snarl. "I have to admit, Keller, I'm disappointed." Reynolds's voice was smooth as velvet, cold as a scalpel. "Of all the people I mentored, I expected more from you than this. Amateur theatrics." Liam managed a thin smile despite the bruises and the IV wound on his arm. "Maybe you should have taught me how to sell my soul for stability. Seems that's the promotion requirement these days." Reynolds' eyes narrowed. "You always did have a problem with authority. But you never understood the real stakes, did you? You saw only your principles, never the price of peace." Rachel wanted to spit in his face, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she met his gaze, refusing to flinch. "You call this peace, torture, abduction, experimenting on people. How many have you disappeared for the sake of your bottom line?" Reynolds' lips twitched into a faint, almost pitying smile. "You mistake necessity for evil, Mrs. Keller. The world is a dangerous place. Power vacuums, genetic arms races. If we don't control this technology, someone else will, someone with less vision." Liam shook his head, voice hoarse but fierce. "There's always an excuse, Simon. I remember when you still believed in the oath. Now you hide behind greater good like every tyrant before you." Reynolds knelt to eye level with Rachel, speaking low and calm. Your husband's loyalty was never to the country. It was to his conscience. That makes for excellent fiction, Mrs. Keller, but poor policy. Rachel saw Juno being forced to his knees in the periphery, but she focused on Reynolds. You talk about policy. What about the families you've destroyed? The victims you've used up? All your calculations? Have you ever once thought about the cost in real human lives? Reynolds straightened, sighing as if addressing petulant children. You see the numbers in isolation. I see the battlefield. 10 lives, 100, 1,000. It's nothing if it prevents 1,000,000 more from dying in chaos. These sacrifices, regrettable, yes, are the bedrock of order. Liam's hands flexed in his restraint's voice icy. You're not preventing chaos. You're breeding it, Simon. You're making monsters and pretending it's medicine. Reynolds smiled again, tired, almost affectionate. You always were dramatic, Liam. But let's not pretend there's still a debate to be had. You're finished. The data you stole is gone. The press will hear nothing. Your nephew will be repatriated, his digital fingerprints erased. He looked at Rachel, his voice gentling, will be offered a choice. Return home, keep your mouth shut, and forget this ever happened. Or join your husband in permanent medical observation. Rachel stared at him, rage simmering in her gut. You think I can forget, after what I've seen? What you've done to Liam? Reynolds's face hardened. Think very carefully before you answer. You have no friends left, Mrs. Keller. You have only options. Silence pulsed thick and heavy. She heard Liam draw a slow breath, saw Juno trembling in the grip of 2 guards. The vast warehouse was suddenly a chessboard one move from mate. She remembered her first meeting with Reynolds years ago at an agency function in Ottawa. Liam had introduced her proud and deferential. Reynolds had shaken her hand, called her the woman behind the legend. Now she saw the truth, the cold calculus behind the smile, the hollowed-out man who'd traded ideals for power. You don't win by threatening me, Rachel said softly, her voice steely. You don't win by hiding in the shadows. You win by being better than your enemies. That was the oath you taught Liam. But you broke it. Reynolds's composure cracked for a heartbeat, then smoothed again. Oaths are for children. The world is run by adults, willing to do what's required. She saw it now, the arrogance, the exhaustion, the fear. Underneath the carefully cultivated calm, Simon Reynolds was afraid not of her or Liam, but of losing control. Liam met Reynolds's gaze, his voice low and implacable. We're not done. You can kill me. You can kill Rachel. But the truth is out there now. Someone will see what you've done. Reynolds's jaw clenched. You're certain of that? You always were too trusting. Rachel held his eyes. Maybe he is. But you're the one who's going to spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder. Reynolds looked between them, the moment stretched taut. Then he signaled to the guards. Take them to holding. We'll decide what to do once I've spoken to the board. Rough hands jerked Rachel to her feet. She risked a glance at Liam. Blood trickled from a split lip, but he managed a small, defiant nod. Juno, eyes wide with fear and anger, was dragged in the other direction. As they were marched away, Rachel heard Reynolds call after them, voice echoing in the cavernous space. Remember this, Mrs. Keller. The world does not reward martyrs. It buries them. The doors slammed. Rachel found herself thrown into a tiny windowless room. Her wrists still bound the stink of bleach and fear thick in the air. She let her head fall back against the wall, fighting despair. But as the quiet settled, she felt a spark ignite in her chest, a memory of Liam's strength, of the promise she'd made herself as she left the ruined mill. Reynolds could threaten, could torture, could kill, but he would never unmake what she had already set in motion. The price of justice was high. Maybe it was higher than she could bear. But she knew with a clarity that burned away fear that she would pay it. That she would never stop. Not while Liam still fought, not while the truth was within reach, and not while men like Simon Reynolds believed the world belonged to them alone. Rachel's world shrank to the tight, cold space of the holding cell. Her wrists throbbed from the zip ties, the concrete bench beneath her hips, biting up through her jeans. For a few minutes she allowed herself the terror, the bitter taste of hopelessness, the raw memory of Reynolds's threats echoing in her head. But then her mind snapped taut, sharpened by a surge of defiance. This was not the end. There was too much left undone. Somewhere in the bowels of this fortress, Juno was alone, and if she knew her nephew at all, he wasn't giving up. The weight of Liam's compass pressed against her ribcage, concealed in her bra. It was her last secret, their last chance. A crackle in the air, vents almost inaudible. Then her phone vibrated, hidden inside the heel of her boot. Juno's code, 3 short buzzes, a long one, then 2 more. She pressed her ear to the cinderblock wall and caught the whisper. Aunt Rachel. Phase 2. If you and Liam aren't released in 15 minutes, I launch the drop. Global. Every DNA file goes public. No more secrets. You know what to do. Be ready. Rachel's pulse hammered. There was only one way Juno could do this. He'd hacked the BioLotus mainframe, set up a dead man's switch, and was ready to bring the whole edifice crashing down unless they walked out of here together. The world would know everything. Every illegal experiment, every manipulated genome, every patient betrayed. She let the weight of that settle inside her. Pride, terror, hope. The door clanged open. 2 guards entered, rough, silent guns drawn. They hauled her to her feet and marched her down a maze of corridors through layers of security glass and echoing tile. She caught a glimpse of Liam, battered but upright, as they shoved him alongside her. Reynolds awaited in the control suite, a glass-walled nerve center overlooking the laboratories, humming with screens and the distant pulse of servers. He was less calm now, lips, thin eyes flat. An aide leaned in, whispering urgently. Reynolds' jaw worked as he listened. "What's going on, Rachel?" demanded Voice Iron. "Your little hacker nephew has made quite a mess," Reynolds spat. "He's triggered a failsafe that's locked us out of our own system. Unless I release you both. Every bit of proprietary data will be sent to the authorities, the press, the global health consortiums." He shook his head, almost in awe of the destruction, then glared at Rachel. "You're bluffing. There's no way he's that good." Rachel met his gaze, defiant. "Try us." Alarms blared suddenly, klaxons, red strobes. On the monitors, lines of code scrolled like rain. Rachel recognized Juno's signature, a rotating digital lotus petals, opening and closing, marking every secure node he'd breached. Reynolds cursed, barking orders. Get into the core lockdown, all access, kill the uplinks. In the confusion, Rachel made her move. Her hand slipped to her side. She'd managed to loosen the zip tie. With a practiced flick, she snapped it, then lunged for the nearest guard. The scuffle was brutal, a fist to her ribs, the sharp bite of a pistol barrel on her shoulder. But she bit down on the pain and rammed her knee into the man's thigh. He staggered. She grabbed his stun baton and jabbed it into his side. He convulsed and dropped. Liam, seeing the opening, threw himself at the other guard, a low tackle that drove them both into a bank of monitors. Rachel snatched the fallen pistol and pressed it into Liam's hand. His grip was weak, but determined. "Move," she hissed. Together they slammed out of the control suite, alarms shrieking behind them. The corridors outside were chaos. White coats running, more security converging. Reynolds' voice booming over the intercom. "All personnel to lockdown. Intruders loose in Sector 3. Rachel yanked Liam behind her, ducking into a stairwell. Her brain raced. Juno needed the control room open for Phase 3, but it was sealed. Unless she fumbled for the compass, heart thudding. Liam caught her look, hope and pain etched in his face. "The chip," he rasped. "Left side by the hinge. I embedded an NFC bypass security override. Gets you past any internal lock." Rachel popped the battered compass open, twisting until the tiny circuit board gleamed in the light. She scanned the map in her mind Juno had shown her. The control room override panel was on level 4. That was where the main data uplink was housed. "Can you make it?" she asked Liam, desperation crackling in her voice. He nodded, teeth gritted. "Don't let Reynolds cut the uplink. That's how he wins. You have to finish it." They moved fast, using every shadow. Rachel checked corners, gun at the ready. Liam followed, swaying but resolute, blood already staining his side from a reopened wound. They reached the 4th floor, smoke and panic everywhere now. Sirens wailed, emergency lights flickered. A guard lunged out, rifle raised. Rachel squeezed the trigger, one shot sent her mass. The man collapsed, writhing. She barely paused. They pressed on. At the end of the hall, the control room's armored door waited unbreakable, except for a tiny square panel blinking red. Rachel pressed the compass chip to the panel. For a heartbeat, nothing. Then it flashed green. The door clicked, hissed open. Inside the room was empty, but for a bank of humming servers, screens showing code racing across the world. Data secrets, the sum total of BioLotus's crimes about to go public. Rachel sprinted to the main console. Juno's avatar flashed on the screen, lines of code ticking down to 0. "You have 60 seconds, Aunt Rachel." His voice whispered through a hidden mic. "If the physical uplink isn't severed, they can still stop it. You know what to do." Reynolds' voice thundered through the speakers. "Rachel, don't touch that console. You have no idea." She ignored him, scanning the terminal. Her hands found the kill switch, yanked the safety, and entered the command Juno had given her release. Suddenly, the room exploded with gunfire. A guard had slipped in behind them, face twisted in fear gun, already up. The first shot missed. The second struck Liam in the chest, spinning him to the floor. Blood pooled quickly, impossibly red against the pale tile. "No," Rachel screamed, diving for him. Her hands pressed against the wound, blood slick and hot, Liam's breath already coming short and shallow. The guard aimed again, but Liam, with the last of his strength, fired the pistol. The shot was true. The man crashed into a rack of servers, twitching, then was still. Rachel's sobbed hands pressed uselessly to Liam's chest. His eyes fluttered open. He forced a weak, bloody smile. "Hey, Rach, did you finish it?"
"I will. I promise I will,"
she whispered, tears streaking her face. He reached for her hand, voice barely a thread. "Don't let them shut it down. No matter what. Don't let them win." She squeezed his hand, heartbreaking, knowing he might not survive. But knowing she would not, could not fail him now. Juno's countdown ticked down 10 seconds, then 5. Rachel stood swiping her bloody hand over the console one last time, confirming the transmission. Outside, the alarms howled. The building shook with chaos, but inside, in that tiny glass room, she felt a strange, perfect calm. It was done. Every secret, every experiment, every life stolen and sacrificed for profit and power, now the world would see. She knelt by Liam, cradling his head in her lap. His breath rattled, but his eyes were clear. "You did it," he murmured, pride in every word. "You did," Rachel whispered, tears falling onto his face. "We did." Outside, doors crashed. Footsteps pounded. Rachel clung to Liam, unwilling to leave him, determined to face whatever came next together. She looked up at the compass in her hand, its battered face glinting in the light, the needle still pointing true. In the distance, a new siren rose, a wailing, unlike the others. She wondered if it was the sound of justice at last breaking through the walls. And with Liam's hand in hers, she faced the door, ready for the world to change. The world cracked open with a single transmission, somewhere between the shrieking alarms and the stuttering breath of a man she loved. Rachel watched the monitors come alive with chaos. News tickers scrolled in languages she'd never learned, voices on every continent shouting over each other. Anchors pausing mid-segment as red banners splashed across their screens. Her own reflection flickered in the glass, blood on her cheek, exhaustion etched deep, but eyes wide with the first glimmer of vindication. Across the globe, a name pulsed on every channel: BioLotus. Screens showed faces, scientists, politicians, patients, betrayed by the very clinics meant to save them. Terms like unauthorized gene therapy, covert human experimentation, genetic weaponization program, spilled from the lips of world leaders, medical experts, terrified relatives. A reporter in Geneva held up a sheaf of documents. Rachel saw Juno's Lotus avatar watermarked in the corner, undeniable and permanent. Images raced from camera to camera. The blueprints for Project Cerberus contracts with military signatures, the anonymous faces of test subjects. A child's eyes stared from a hospital cot. An elderly man, face gaunt and haunted, told the story of how he'd signed a consent form at a flu clinic and spent the next 3 years in and out of hospitals, his blood and tissue drawn for research. In the control room, Rachel pressed trembling hands to her mouth, fighting a sob. She could hear Juno's voice in her earpiece, tight with emotion. "It's working, Aunt Rachel. Every note, every newsroom. They can't bury it now. They can't bury any of us. Liam, ghost pale and fighting for breath, managed to smile. You did it. You finally did it.
We did it,
Rachel whispered, pressing her forehead to his. The alarms faded into a distant, meaningless drone. She could feel the tide turning even here in the belly of the beast. The fortress was crumbling. Outside, the storm had thickened snow swirling in blinding sheets across the compound. But above the whiteout, a new sound emerged, the thumping, insistent rhythm of helicopter blades. Rachel looked up through the shattered glass of the control suite and saw spotlights stabbing down from the sky. Government insignias glinted off their hulls, Canadian, American, Interpol blue. Down below the perimeter was a tangle of flashing lights. Dozens of vehicles slid across the icy asphalt. Sirens rose in harmony, a chorus of authority converging on the one place that had hidden so much for so long. Inside, the security teams were fracturing. Some guards threw down their weapons, hands raised. Others tried to smash servers, tear out hard drives, but Juno's failsafe had locked every port, every interface. Evidence poured into the world like floodwater, the names and crimes of the powerful scrolling for all to see. Rachel pressed a bloody hand to Liam's wound, her own voice shaking.
We have to move. They're coming, but they won't know who to save, who to trust.
He tried to sit stubborn even now. She saw the grit in his eyes and knew if he was going to die, it wouldn't be in this place. Juno's voice returned urgent. Main stairwell, east side. I'm looping cameras for 2 minutes. Go now. Rachel braced Liam against her, one arm under his shoulders. Come on, I've got you. Just a little further. She wanted to believe it was true. They stumbled from the control room. Sirens blaring, boots slipping on blood-slicked tile. Every step was a gamble. If a guard rounded the corner, if Reynolds found them, if the wrong soldier burst through the next door. But fate, for once, was on their side. They found Juno crouched at a junction, face set, hands flying over his battered tablet. Rachel could barely recognize the boy she'd met in Liam's old family photos, the kid with a stubborn cowlick and defiant grin. This was a man, battle-forged eyes, alive with purpose and fear. He looked at Liam, then at Rachel, and nodded once. This way. They sprinted down a service hall, then down a half-lit stairwell. At the ground floor, the east exit loomed, guarded, but only barely. The men there seemed more interested in surrendering than shooting. Rachel met their eyes, gun raised, and they backed away, hands up. No one wanted to die for BioLotus tonight. Snow hit them like a wall, stinging, blinding, the cold a slap after the sterile heat inside. Rachel dragged Liam, Juno leading the way as they crossed the open yard, weaving between loading docks and abandoned vans. Above, a helicopter spotlight flashed past, searching but not settling on them. They reached the tree-lined, thick pine and frozen brush. Rachel risked a glance back. The compound was in chaos, red and blue lights shouting the whir of a bullhorn, somewhere in the melee. Her breath steamed in the cold, each exhale a promise. Almost there, she whispered, just a little farther. Behind them, a door slammed. Footsteps pounded across the snow. Rachel turned, pistol ready, her body between Liam and the threat. Director Reynolds emerged into the light, no longer the sculpted man in a suit, but something smaller, hair, wild face, gray eyes wide and hunted. He clutched a leather satchel to his chest, and for the first time Rachel saw fear, real and final, in his gaze. He stared at her, then at the helicopters, at the army of flashing lights and converging soldiers, and knew that it was over. The world was watching. There would be no deal, no back channel, no erasure of what he'd done. He knelt in the snow, opening the satchel. For a moment, Rachel thought he might draw a weapon, or a flash drive, or some last desperate leverage. Instead, he pulled out a slim glass vial, uncorked it, and downed the contents in one steady swallow. She understood in a flash: cyanide. The coward's way out. He would never answer for his crimes. Reynolds looked at her, something like regret in his eyes. You think you've won. But chaos is patient. It always returns. His eyes glazed over. He pitched forward, face in the snow, the satchel spilling across the ground, notes, passports, a scatter of lives destroyed and discarded. Rachel felt no triumph, only a hollow sorrow. She knelt, grabbed the satchel, and searched it for anything left to use against the last of the cabal. Every scrap would count. Behind her, the helicopters descended wheels, kissing ice soldiers, fanning out guns, ready, barking orders. For a moment, all was confusion. Juno raised his hands, dropping his tablet. Rachel shouted her name, holding Liam upright, her hands red with his blood. A medic pushed through the line, eyes wide, as he recognized the faces from the leak already streaming on his phone. Rachel surrendered, relief and terror fighting inside her. "He's hurt. He needs help, please." The medic didn't hesitate. Liam was lifted onto a stretcher, an IV pressed into his arm, oxygen mask over his mouth. Rachel hovered at his side, refusing to let go, even as uniformed officers tried to separate them. Juno, hands cuffed loosely, was led to an armored van, but Rachel caught his eye, saw the spark there, the pride, the relief. As they were loaded into the waiting choppers, Rachel looked down at the burning facility, at the line of surrendered guards, the collapsed body of Reynolds. The world was moving at a new speed. Now questions, orders, cameras, the promise of headlines that would not fade for years. In the cabin with the doors shut and the world at last locked out, Rachel bent over Liam. His eyes fluttered open, pain and hope mingling. She brushed sweat from his brow, voice steady. "It's over," she said, not sure if she was promising him or herself. "It's all out now. They can't hurt us anymore." Liam managed a faint, crooked smile. "You always were stubborn, Rach." Tears slid down her face, mingling with the blood and sweat. "You taught me how." Outside the window, morning was breaking, the first gray light slicing through the storm. Somewhere far below, sirens still wailed and cameras still flashed. But Rachel Keller closed her eyes, one hand wrapped around Liam's, the other still clutching the broken compass. A battered thing that had against all odds led her through the storm. She didn't know what waited on the other side of this battle trial healing, or another kind of war, but she knew one thing, as certain as the beat of the helicopter blades above and the new sun rising over a world forever changed. Justice finally had been served. Hospitals always felt the same to Rachel. No matter the city-filtered air, that sterile hush, the strange mingling of hope and dread that clung to every whitewashed corridor. But this time, as she walked the hallway to Liam's room, the cold fluorescent light seemed a little softer. The anxious murmurs of nurses and orderlies no longer a threat, but the distant hum of a world still spinning. She felt for the first time in years that the worst had finally passed. Liam was awake, alive. She paused at the door, fingers trembling on the handle, afraid it might all dissolve into another cruel dream. But when she opened it, she found him propped up in bed, in his arm, wrapped in hospital blankets that seemed both too small and impossibly large for his gaunt frame. His face was pale bruises, blossoming under the eyes, lips cracked, but he smiled. And for Rachel, that was all that mattered. She crossed the room in 3 long strides, pulled a chair to his bedside, and without a word, took his hand in both of hers. His grip was weak but insistent. She traced the lines of his knuckles, feeling the pulse that had once faded from her life and was now against every odds beating steady and true. For a long time, they said nothing. No words could contain the tide of relief, the sheer exhaustion, the aching gratitude. The sun crept through the window, catching dust motes in its glow, warming the blankets, the lines of Liam's face and Rachel's heart. He squeezed her hand, then shifted slightly, wincing at the pain, but refusing to let go. Rachel's lips quivered, the old sadness threatening to rise. But this time something new took its place, a tremulous, genuine smile. It caught her by surprise, lifting her cheeks, sending a rush of warmth through her chest. She laughed, soft and broken at first, then growing echoing in the quiet of the room. Liam blinked, his own mouth twisting into a lopsided grin. "Don't make me laugh, Rach. It hurts." "I'm sorry," she choked, wiping at her eyes. I haven't had a reason in 3 years." He squeezed her fingers. "We have one now." A nurse peeked in, smiled at the sight, and slipped away, leaving them to their miracle. For the first time since the world turned upside down, Rachel allowed herself to believe in healing, not just survival, but the fragile return of joy. She let herself rest her head on his arm, feeling the rise and fall of his breathing, letting his warmth seep into her bones. The fight was not over. Trials, testimonies, questions would come. But for now she let herself exist only in this room, only in this moment, hand in hand with the man she refused to lose. Days slipped by. Each morning, Rachel returned to the hospital, always with a thermos of coffee and a new story from the outside world. Juno visited, sometimes staying late into the night, his presence a reminder that family, chosen or otherwise, was the thing that truly endured. One afternoon, as the sun cast golden bars across the tiled floor, a nurse rolled a television to the foot of the bed. The evening news was already underway, the anchor's voice solemn, reverberating across the country. Muse. In breaking developments, authorities have confirmed the conclusion of Operation Whistleblow, the multi-agency investigation into the BioLotus genetic experiment scandal. Over 30 high-level officials and executives are under arrest or investigation, with international warrants issued for several more. Public health officials are working around the clock to ensure that those affected by unauthorized gene therapies receive appropriate care. Government spokespeople credit anonymous whistleblowers and a collaborative effort between Canadian and international law enforcement for making the truth impossible to bury. Rachel watched the screen, her hand still in Liam's. The scrolling ticker repeated the words she'd waited so long to hear: justice, accountability, recovery. She saw Juno's digital lotus in the corner of the files, saw an old photo of Liam flash on the screen, his smile, his stubbornness, his refusal to look away when it mattered most. The anchor paused, then added, "The Prime Minister will address the nation tonight, promising reforms to prevent such abuses of power in the future. For the families affected, and for those who risked everything to bring these crimes to light tonight, marks the first step in a long road toward healing." Rachel glanced at Liam. His eyes were wet and he nodded, too full for words. That night, the family came together in Rachel's small apartment, a space that had once felt hollow and haunted, now filled with the clatter of plates, the smell of soup, the low rumble of laughter. Juno set the table, arguing about which music to play, settling finally on Liam's favorite old record, letting it spin softly in the background. They ate simply chicken stew, bread, strong tea, but each bite was a celebration, every glance a silent thank you. Rachel caught Juno watching Liam with awe and relief. She caught herself smiling more than once, unguarded and free. After dinner, they sat in the living room, the city lights painting shifting shadows across the walls. Juno pulled out his laptop, flipping through newscasts, pausing on the flood of headlines that now filled every feed. For a moment, no one spoke. They didn't need to. Liam reached across the table, his hand shaking but determined, and rested it on Juno's shoulder. "You saved us," he said. "Not just us, everyone." Juno ducked his head, embarrassment warring with pride. I just did what I had to." "That's what being family means," Rachel said quietly. "You show up. You fight. You hold on." Outside, snow began to fall again, soft, silent, blanketing the world in a kind of mercy. Rachel closed her eyes, listened to the hush, and felt the future open up, no longer as a threat, but as a promise. Liam squeezed her hand once more. "We'll be all right," he murmured. And for the first time, she truly believed him. The news played on headlines, scrolling voices of outrage and hope echoing far beyond their little living room. But inside, all was peace battered-earned, and all the more precious for it. Rachel looked at her family, at the man she'd fought for, the boy who'd become a hero, the life they'd stitched back together from the edge of disaster. She smiled, warm and bright, and let the light of their survival fill her heart. In that moment, she knew this was what they'd won: not just justice, not just truth, but the right to begin again. Together. Sunlight cut through the kitchen window, turning the steam from a chipped mug into gold. The apartment had grown quieter these days, the tension that once haunted every corner replaced by something softer, more enduring, a hush made not of fear, but of peace, hard-won. Yet in that quiet, life moved forward. Liam sat at the table, a thick notebook open in front of him. His hands were steadier now, though the scars and tremors remained a reminder of all the years stolen, all the pain endured. He rolled his shoulder, testing the slow ache from the gunshot that nearly ended him, then let out a breath, put pen to paper, and began to write. He titled the first page, in careful block letters, "The Truth for Rachel and Juno, and for whoever comes after." This time, the notes weren't for an agency file, or for a clandestine operation, or to be buried under lock and key. They were for his wife, for his nephew, for anyone who would one day ask, "How did this happen? Why did you keep fighting?" The story wasn't just evidence, it was legacy. He started at the beginning, not with Bio-Lotus or the whistleblower leaks, but with memories that mattered: the cold sting of Yukon air, the promise he made Rachel beneath a sky alive with stars. The first time he realized the line between right and wrong wasn't always clear, even for a good man. He wrote about the cost of keeping secrets, about the slow erosion of hope, and the stubbornness required to protect what was sacred when the world demanded silence. He wrote of Rachel's courage, the way she refused to let him become a memory, the steel in her spine when the world tried to grind her down. He wrote of Juno, who'd turned a childhood of lost parents and broken systems into a kind of digital heroism. He wrote of all the invisible hands who'd helped the nurse who passed a note, the old friend who made a single dangerous call, the stranger who chose not to look the other way. For hours, the pen moved line after line. Sometimes he paused, the words catching in his throat, old pain twisting through his ribs. But mostly there was relief, a slow cleansing flood, as if with every confession the weight of what he'd carried was lifted not just from his shoulders, but from the world itself. When he finished for the day, he looked up to see Rachel standing in the doorway, arms crossed, a smile on her lips. "How's the memoir coming?" she asked gently. He grinned, closing the notebook. "I'm not as poetic as you, Rach, but maybe honesty's enough." She came to him, pressing a kiss to his temple, her hand warm on his back. "Honesty is everything." Rachel wandered to the sideboard, where the compass sat cleaned, polished, the crack still visible, but now gleaming, almost beautiful. She picked it up, rolling it between her palms, feeling the old brass warm in her hands. 3 years ago, the compass was just a tool, a battered relic of Liam's work, a silent witness to his disappearance. Now it was a symbol of survival, of faith, of the stubborn refusal to let grief become defeat. She pressed the seam, letting the needle spin, the faint ticking a lullaby in the quiet house. She remembered the terror, the fury, the endless nights, with only the compass and a fading memory for company. And she remembered, too, the way hope had crept in, despite it all, the conviction that somewhere, somehow, Liam was alive, fighting for her as she fought for him. She set the compass on her writing desk, next to a thick stack of pages, the first chapters of her own story. The title was scrawled across the top in her looping, determined script: The Broken Compass, A Journey Unbowed. The words came haltingly at first, then with increasing certainty. She wrote of the phone calls that changed everything, of the bitter taste of betrayal and the even sharper taste of vindication. She wrote about her fear not just of loss, but of losing herself, of becoming someone who gave up before the story was finished. She wrote about family, what it meant to lose one, to build one, to fight for the right to call something your own. Her chapters were full of details. The wind off Lake Ontario, the smell of cheap coffee in Yukon motels, the buzz of helicopter blades in a snowstorm. But beneath every line was a simple truth. You only survive the storm if you never stop searching for what matters. At night, she sat at the kitchen table with Liam, sharing drafts, trading edits. Sometimes they argued over details. Sometimes they laughed so hard she thought the neighbors would complain. Always they finished by holding hands, the compass between them, a talisman against the darkness. Juno visited, often bringing news of the outside world: court dates for the Bio-Lotus executives, new regulations to protect patients, messages from whistleblowers inspired by their story. He set up a website for Rachel's book, crowdsourced translations, and fielded interview requests from every corner of the globe. Sometimes he joked about hacking the New York Times bestseller list, but mostly he just wanted people to know it was possible to fight back. And slowly, impossibly, the wounds began to heal. Liam took walks with Rachel in the early morning, the city quiet, the streets washed clean by rain. He learned to breathe again, to trust in the everyday rhythm of life: mail in the slot, coffee on the stove, laughter rising up the stairwell. Rachel started teaching writing at a local community center, sharing what she'd learned about stories and survival with anyone who needed hope. She watched students grow, watched herself grow, and realized the future didn't have to be shaped by fear. Sometimes she would hold the compass to her heart and whisper a thank you to the world, to chance, to all the invisible threads that led her back to this life. On the day they finished the manuscript, Rachel and Liam invited Juno over for dinner. They sat by the open window, summer air carrying the scent of grass and distant music. They toasted with lemonade the compass in the center of the table, gleaming in the late sunlight. "To truth," Rachel said. "To not giving up." Liam added, voice strong. Juno grinned. "To hacking the future." They laughed, glasses clinking, the echo ringing into the warm, forgiving night. After Juno left, Rachel stepped onto the balcony, the city lights a necklace across the horizon. She turned the compass over in her palm, watched the needle settle. For the first time, it didn't matter where it pointed. She had found her way home. Liam joined her, his arm around her shoulders, his voice gentle. "You think anyone will believe us?" he asked. She smiled, leaning into him. "That's not our problem anymore. Our job was to live, to tell the truth." He pressed his lips to her hair, eyes shining. "You did more than survive, Rach. You saved me. You saved us all." Rachel closed her eyes, letting the city's hush and the weight of the compass fill her with peace. She thought of all the roads behind her, all the pain, the courage, the nights she nearly gave up. And she promised herself and the world. The journey would go on. The compass would never be broken again. Inside, on the kitchen table, her story waited. Ready for the world, for the next generation, for anyone searching for a way through the dark. And outside in the city, alive with hope, Rachel Keller let herself believe finally in new beginnings. The conference room was bright alive, with restless energy, 1,000 faces. Some skeptical, some eager, most haunted by stories they would never share outside these walls. Juno Keller stood at the lectern, his hands gripping the sides, knuckles whitening as the crowd fell silent. Behind him, a giant screen flickered with the words, "Global Conference on Human Trafficking and Bioethics, New York City." He scanned the audience, activists, investigators, doctors, journalists, survivors. The kind of gathering that would have intimidated him years ago when he was still a lonely teenager coding in his foster home's basement. But now, standing in a crisp navy suit with his wild curls tamed and his story burning in his chest, Juno felt only clarity, only purpose. "My name is Juno Keller," he began, voice steady, ringing out into the crowded hall. "I'm here because of my Uncle Liam, because of the people who loved him and the people he refused to leave behind. I stand here on the other side of a secret that nearly killed my family. But because we told it, because we refused to let the truth stay buried. A lot of people in this room are alive and free today." The screen behind him flashed photos, a battered compass, a police bust, DNA charts, news clips from the whistleblow operation. Juno let the images hang in the air, letting them do the work that words sometimes failed to. He took a breath, glancing at the front row, Rachel and Liam sitting together, hands entwined, their eyes bright with pride and the pain of memory. Juno smiled, heart-thudding, then turned back to the crowd. "I want to talk about legacy," he said, "and what it means to be part of something bigger than your own fear. My Uncle Liam wasn't perfect. He was stubborn, impatient, and sometimes too brave for his own good. But he taught me and everyone who fought beside him that there are lines you don't cross and people you never abandon, even when it means risking everything." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, nodding, some dabbing tears. Juno continued, voice tightening as he thought of the faces he'd seen, the stories that had flooded the world after the leak. "When the BioLotus files went public, we thought it was about justice, about punishing the bad guys. But what I learned is that justice is just the beginning. What comes after is healing. What comes after is connection, one survivor to another, one whistleblower to another, one family reaching for hope again." He gestured to the screen. "Some of the people you're about to meet are here because my uncle wouldn't quit. Because Rachel wouldn't quit. Because when it mattered most, we didn't give up on each other." He nodded to the technician. The lights dimmed, and a short video played, interviews with the rescued. Faces appeared, each one luminous, with the fragile courage of those who have known suffering and chosen to live anyway. A woman, her hands shaking but her gaze unwavering, said, "They took everything from me. My body, my future. But because of those files, they found me. They brought me home. I'm learning how to live again." A boy no older than 15 spoke from a sunny rehabilitation center. "I thought I'd die in that lab. They told us nobody was coming. But someone did. I'm going to be a doctor now. I want to save people." A man in a wheelchair, voice rough, recounted, "I don't hate them even now. But I'll never stop fighting for the ones still missing, for the families who lost everything." Juno watched the montage, his throat tight, his hands trembling. This was what victory looked like. Not in headlines, not in prison sentences, but in the fragile, slow, stubborn rebirth of hope. The screen faded to black. Juno stepped back into the light, voice shaking with emotion. That's the real legacy. Not just the people who exposed the truth, but the ones who survived it. The ones who get up every morning and decide to heal, to fight, to forgive. My uncle is here today because Rachel never stopped searching. And because he never stopped believing that someone somewhere would bring him home. A hush settled over the room. Then slowly applause rose, scattered at first, then a wave, warm and rolling, filling the hall. Juno nodded, blinking back tears. He stepped down from the stage into the arms of his family. Rachel hugged him fierce and proud. You made him immortal, she whispered. That's what every story wants. Liam, looking older and frailer now, but every bit as stubborn, clapped Juno on the shoulder. You did what I never could. You made them listen. They stayed for hours, surrounded by survivors and advocates, sharing stories, offering what advice they could. Later in the hotel room, Rachel opened her email to find dozens of letters, families, reunited clinics, shut down police raids underway. The ripples of their story had gone everywhere. The compass she kept in her pocket was no longer a symbol of loss, but of hope of what it meant to find true north after years in the dark. Summer arrived, carrying with it a warmth that felt almost impossible after so much cold. One morning, Rachel and Liam stood at the edge of a wooden dock, hand in hand, watching a small plane refuel. Alaska shimmered on the horizon, blue mountains, endless sky, the dream they'd nearly let slip away. Liam's health had returned in fits and starts. Slow walks, careful medication, the ache of old wounds, never quite leaving. But his spirit was as wild as ever. He grinned, lifting their luggage into the bush plane, then turned to Rachel with the same look he'd given her when he first proposed decades ago. You ready? He asked. She laughed, the sound bright, ringing in the open air. I was born ready. This time, let's not get chased by anyone. He smiled, drawing her close, the lines on his face deepening with happiness and something softer peace. As the plane climbed into the sky, the world fell away beneath them. Forests, rivers, scars, both visible and hidden. Rachel pressed her forehead to the window, watching the horizon widen, the sense of possibility stretching farther than she'd ever imagined. Liam squeezed her hand, the battered compass glinting between their palms, a memory and a promise all at once. They landed in a small Alaskan village, greeted by laughter and music. The taste of salmon and wild berries. The gentle roar of the ocean beyond the trees. They spent their days hiking, fishing, letting the land heal them in ways nothing else could. At night, beneath the northern lights, they whispered about the future, about books, unwritten journeys yet to come, the endless gift of a second chance. Sometimes Rachel would find herself alone on the porch, the compass in her palm feeling the pulse of its weight and the steadiness of its direction. She understood now that the point was never the needle, but the journey, the courage to keep going, even when the way was lost. Back home, Juno traveled the world, consulting, teaching, carrying their story to places where hope was still a whisper. He sent postcards, pictures of refugee camps, high-tech labs, border crossings. Each one a reminder that the fight would never really end, but that love, once set loose in the world, could never be taken back. Rachel kept every card, every message, every memory. She knew her family had become something more than the sum of its suffering. They had become a light for others, a direction for those still wandering. And when the world seemed too dark, too uncertain, she would sit beside Liam, the compass between them, and remind herself of everything they'd endured, everything they'd gained, and everything yet to come. The broken compass had brought them home. And their story, their courage, their stubborn hope, their fierce, unyielding love would guide others long after the path ahead disappeared into the wild. The afternoon light is soft, pouring through the wide window of a study that smells of old paper ink and the faint tang of lemon polish. On the desk beside a stack of marked-up manuscripts and a mug with fading paint rests a small glass case, plain, understated, the kind you'd walk past in a museum without a second glance. Inside, cradled on dark velvet, lies the broken compass. The crack across its face catches the sun, sending a crooked band of gold along the wall. The needle forever stuck just off true north glints in the light, a testament to stubborn journeys and roads that never ran straight. Etched into a simple brass plaque below are the words, "Even if the compass can't point the way, my heart always knows how to come home." As the camera lingers on the compass, the first notes of a gentle piano begin a melody woven with hope, quiet and unhurried. The music rises, and with it the screen dissolves into a montage, a living quilt of memory and new beginnings. The face of the first survivor appears a young woman with dark hair sitting at a cafe window. Where once there had been only shadows and wariness, now there is laughter. A friend slides a pastry across the table, and she grins, a dimple forming in her cheek. She lifts her coffee in a silent toast, eyes bright with the simple joy of being safe. Cut to a hospital in Montreal. A doctor in a white coat leads a boy down a hallway, his gait strong, his smile wider than his face. They pass a mirror, and for a moment the boy hesitates, studying his reflection. Then he turns away, the ghost of captivity, replaced by the restless curiosity of youth. The doctor's hand is steady on his shoulder. A man in a wheelchair wheels himself through a sunlit garden, pausing beneath an archway of roses. A young girl joins him, dropping petals in his lap. He reaches for her hand, and together they watch the wind move through the leaves, the past fading, the world stretching open and wide before them. The music swells, cellos and violins, joining the piano, lifting, healing. Scenes of reunions, meals shared, embraces that linger. Faces once marked by fear now glow with a quiet, hard-won peace. Juno stands before a class of students, gesturing to a projection of the compass on the wall. He tells the story, his hands painting the air, laughter breaking out as he mimics Liam's stubbornness or Rachel's unwavering resolve. The students lean forward, hungry for the story, for the hope that comes from surviving the worst. Rachel and Liam, older now, walk along the edge of a cold blue lake. The sky is streaked with the first pale light of morning. Rachel stops, leans into Liam, their hands entwined. They watch the sun rise, gold spilling across the water, the world remade again and again. The broken compass dangles from her wrist, the chain glinting. In the final frames, the music softens, growing intimate. Rachel's voice, older and warmer, fills the quiet. Sometimes we get lost. Sometimes the things we build to guide us break, and the world turns strange. But if we keep moving, if we trust our hearts and the ones who walk beside us, we can always find our way home. Even in the dark. Especially in the dark. The camera returns to the study. The broken compass rests in its case, surrounded by shelves of books and photographs, family dinners, mountain trails, classrooms filled with laughing students. The plaque gleams in the golden light. Outside, the sounds of life drift in, children shouting a bicycle bell bird song. The melody fades, lingering on a single hopeful note. The screen holds on the inscription one last time. Even if the compass can't point the way, my heart always knows how to come home. Fade to white. The story ends, but the light remains. Hoi ChatGPT.